Ladies and gentlemen, that was the second business session chaired by Vijay Iyengar. We have Jeff Pevenage, Carl Potts, and Peter Wilson. Thank you, gentlemen. Wonderful. May I request Mr. Vijay Iyengar to continue on the seat because we are now moving on to the panel discussion on peas. We're way behind time, but this panel discussion is always an important part of this conclave. The panel discussion on peas has 4 more panelists. I'd like to request Brett Dodson of Australian Grain Export to also grace the dais. Thank you, Brett. Please also welcome Varinder Machiral of Emanos International Limited. Thank you, Mr. Machiral. Moving on, please welcome Chad Popovich of Glencoe Grain. And completing the panel, from SRCo Exim Private Limited, please welcome Anurag Kulsan. Ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a very interesting half an hour, this panel discussion. And I'll request Mr. Iyengar to start this discussion.
I thought it was 45 minutes.
Good thinking, time will pass so fast, we wouldn't know.
We have a very interesting panel here. Earlier during today and I think during the course of yesterday evening, there was quite a few references to imports into India. Peas is one of the major imports, and as we've just finished some country presentations, and it's good to have some perspective into what's going to happen in the global pea market. We have some of the movers and shakers behind the global pea market here. To my right is Chad Popovich, head of pea trade at Glencoe Grain, and then we have Anurag Tulsian, you're a board member at Sicil Septic, isn't it? And Varinder and Brett Dobson as well. So basically, let me, we'll feel free to ask questions if at any point during our discussions there are some issues that you need answers to, or anything that's been said that's not clear. Let me start off with first asking a question of Chad. The continuing refrain over the last 2 days has been the transport bottlenecks, and you know, a lot of this is dependent on how the line companies, as the likes of Glencore, JR, Patterson, and Cargill are referred to in Canada. And you know, for them, it's a question of allocating resources. And over the last year or so, wheat has been the star performer. So as a result of which, everything else that is going to be exported out of Canada took a backseat. Chad, how do you see this going forward? I suppose the bottleneck of transport will get better going forward, but how do you see the allocation of resources?
Thanks, Vijay. I guess when it comes to logistics issues in Canada, first off, I think that the logistics will improve a little bit. Not anytime soon, I think more so probably in the summer months of June, July. In saying that, they will improve slightly. It still comes down to terminal capacity at the end of the day, as Vijay mentioned. I think it really comes down to the demand from a global scale. When you look at wheat and canola as well, there's excellent world demand, and Canada has proved to be the cheapest out there for the most part. So that has dedicated a lot of the Canadian terminal capacity to those two commodities. I really don't see that changing all that much. I can speak for the canola side. You know, new crop is being sold very aggressively already out of Canada for canola. That is already taking up a lot of the terminal capacity. It's going to continue to do so. The demand will continue to be strong, and in addition to that, it's also happening on the wheat side. So I really don't see much changing all that much. When you look at Canada, there were very big crops this past year. We just cannot move everything. And then it comes down to demand, it comes down to the price to the farmer and his cost of production and what he wants to move and what he wants to store on farm. In a perfect world, I think he'd want to move everything. To be 100% realistic, that's not going to happen. So I just don't see the issue really getting better probably until mid-2015 in my opinion.
So going forward, you still see rationing of supply of bulk peas into wherever it needs to go?
I believe that there will be a steady flow of peas, but in previous years, we would see maybe 6-7 vessels in a month out of Canada shipped. I just don't think that's going to happen anymore. Maybe you see a little bit, I guess, more aggressiveness, I'll say, or larger shipments early in the crop year. But still, there's such a big carryout that everyone is fighting for that terminal capacity. So I think it's going to be more of a steady flow, which probably helps a market like India at the end of the day with spot values anyways.
Anurag, this would mean that the Indian buyer will have to change his buying pattern. Normally, the Indian buyer has always been a spot buyer. Because of these issues surrounding transport and logistics in Canada, you're going to have the buyer going forward, more and more forward, leading to more uncertainty, more risk. How do you think the buyers will react to it, and how do you think we can manage that the volatility as a result?
Thank you, Vijay. Basically, you are very correct. Until now, we've been used to buying and selling on fairly spot basis, wherein we trade generally the next month or the third month. But due to these logistical problems in Canada nowadays, it's impossible to get something very nearby. And as you also are aware, a lot of business has already been done for basis new crop August, September, October positions. Of course, this entails a lot of volatility as regards currency is concerned, because the Indian rupee last year, as we saw, it really had wild swings. But again, the buyers also are getting a bit more accustomed to this, and they are now going into hedging. At least some of the bigger buyers, they hedge their positions accordingly. But this definitely will remain a trend now for some time, and we'll have to get used to the fact that we will not get something nearby very quickly, at least as regards the bulk vessel positions are concerned. On the container side as well, it is again a difficult position, and we are not getting anything for a nearby shipment, at least from Canada. And we've done a lot of business basis May, June, July, August going forward. And sellers also are being extremely cautious. And instead of a usual 30-day period, now the trend from Canada is now changing to almost a 60-day shipment period, because they also don't want to take chances wherein if shipments are delayed, they don't want extensions later on. And markets being so volatile, they don't want to be caught at the wrong end. So buyers also will have to get accustomed to the fact until and unless these logistics issues in Canada are settled. And yes, it is difficult, but then I think we'll have to live with it and work accordingly. Thank you.
Varunda, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I feel that market will continue to be steady despite of all these hassles, because Indian buyers have also changed their buying pattern. They initially had been taking larger positions, if so to say 2 years back. They have been sitting on 20,000, 25,000 tonners vessels, each person importing it. Now they have cut down to a size of 10,000, 5,000, in a multiple of 5,000, I would say, or 10,000 max. So that has, to an extent, steadied the market. What we have seen in the last 6 months, that the supply, despite of supply being tight, the market really did not jack up much, and it did not go down as well. So it has fairly steadied down over the last 6 months, and this pattern will continue for the next 6 months as well. That's what my reading is.
This year, they're also talking about a very good desi crop as well as a good yellow pea crop in India. Do you think the recent rains have affected it, and how do you see the desi yellow pea price link going forward?
Basically, the last year's crop, which we were told was around 500 to 550,000 tons, and this year we were expecting it to go up by almost 30 to 40%. But from the estimates which I get from the trade, we should be expecting a crop size of maybe 600,000 tons this year. There have been some damages, and as Varinder also said, I think the markets on peas at least, I think it should be steady. Maybe it will be bearish for the next couple of months or 3 months, because irrespective of the crop size, there will be harvest pressure in India, and it is felt always. But post maybe May, June, July onwards, the market should then again become steady, and we should see some good markets.
I think chickpeas will also have an effect on this, because chickpeas is already trading at below MSP levels. So that will also put a stress onto the yellow prices, so they would remain where they are as of now.
But over the last few years, you've had the dun pea production in Australia sort of either static or go down, as a result of which, even in markets like Bangladesh and possibly except for Tuticorin, dun pea is not something that is readily acceptable as a substitute. How do you see the dun pea production in Australia, and do you see some reaction in Australia, particularly because of all the transport delays in Canada? There may be odd opportunities coming forward. How does the Australian farmer react?
Thanks, Vijay. Yeah, you're right. Over probably the last 4 years, especially since probably 2010, 2011, where we had a crop of 450,000 tonnes, and we managed to export nearly 300,000 tonnes of that to various countries. Since then, we've had a change in our structures as well, and in port capacities, which has had an influence on the pulse side of the business. To be able to lock away a shipping slot is very difficult, because for timing wise, you're not sure when India or Bangladesh or another country would like product. So to be able to buy a shipping slot going forward is something that's very difficult to manage. Since then, we have seen a decline, weather conditions, market forces, where our crop has shrunk. Traditionally South Australia would produce somewhere between 180,000 to 200,000 tonnes. The last 2 years, I'd say that's now falling down to more likely 120 to 130,000 tonnes. And as Peter alluded to, earlier in his speech, this past year we've seen with dun pea prices sliding on the back of probably Desi chickpeas sliding as well, our prices got down quite cheap to about 275 to 280 Aussie dollars in South Australia, and we saw a lot of the stock feed manufacturers start buying and very aggressively. So we've seen an increase in that side of the business. So the crop has shrunk, and we've seen an increase in stock feed demand. Obviously, over the years, our market share into Chitty, Corinne and Calcutta markets for dun peas has been eroded because of yellow peas, and I think that's probably made more difficult for Australia to be able to move volume. And so today, most of our product is moving by containers. There is the odd bulk vessel that gets done, but it is difficult to manage, as I previously said.
China has been thing that's been left out of discussions until now, and late last year, when the Indian rupee suffered a heavy devaluation and there were requests from the Indian buyers to defer shipments, China stepped into the breach, and if you follow the statistics, until December, the export from Canada was nearly about 1.1 million tons, of which a substantial portion went to China. Thankfully, and that was a relief to yellow pea traders like ourselves. Chad, how do you see the Chinese demand? Since then, I think China has tapered off because they over-imported during that period. Do you see the Chinese coming back into the market, and do you see them as strong consumers in the years to come?
I guess first off, yes, there was a lot shipped to China very early. They were in the market for new crop last year before India or anyone else was there to buy. They loaded up between that August and December timeframe, and I believe there's just over 500,000 tons shipped to China from Canada in between August and December 2013. So historically very, very strong. We will see, and even from an overall number, not just China, but an overall number of exports out of Canada, the exports will start to slow down. We've seen that in January already, and I think most of us know what is in the lineup for the next few months. So the export pace will definitely slow down, meaning China is going to be taking less as well. So you know, at the end of the year, I think China will probably end up in and around that 750 to 800,000 ton mark of total peas, majority being yellow. And so there are some shipments still to come over the balance of this crop year, but definitely the export pace will slow down. When you look at the future, I think the past 5 to 7 years are a glaring point that China's there to buy. Everyone speaks of China surpassing India when it comes to buying yellow peas and what they're going to be importing on a year-to-year basis. I think over the next 2 to 5 years, we're probably going to see China import about 1 million tons of Canadian peas. So I think the demand is going to remain strong, and they could surpass India sooner rather than later when it comes to imports.
Last year also, around the April, May during Cecil's, there was a lot of talk of good Russian crops and how there will be enormous quantities coming out of Russia. But somehow that whole thing dried up, and I think Russia exported something like 120,000 tons with maybe 1 or 2 bulk vessels. Do you, it seems that there were some rains at the time of harvest which damaged the crop. Do you see the Russians sort of cutting back on their seeding as a result of what happened to them last year? And how do you see Russia as a constant supplier going forward? Because don't forget, the prices have also come down, and Canada seems to be a more efficient producer of yellow peas.